Good morning, students. Today I will discuss on three of the very important scenes in Macbeth. The first one is considered as the Dagger Scene, the Dagger episode actually. The second one is the very next section, that is called the Duncan's murder scene. And the third one is the Porter scene, that is very important and very problematic so far as the Shakespearean criticisms are concerned. You see, the Porter scene and the significance of the Porter scene and the reference to the comic relief in a particular kind of a tragedy, especially in Macbeth. The first thing that we have to concentrate on, it is called the Dagger Scene. The scene actually begins with a visionary dagger. Macbeth is envisioning a visionary dagger as if it is hanging in front of him, and it is guiding Macbeth towards the room of Duncan. So I am reading from the very beginning of this particular scene. It is just before Macbeth is envisioning the dagger, and it is Act 2, Scene 1, right? Act 2, Scene 1. There we get Banquo and Fleance. They are bearing a torch before them, and Banquo says, "How goes the night, boy?" Fleance says, "The moon is down. I have not heard the clock." And Banquo, and she goes down at 12. Fleance, "I take it. It's later, sir." And Banquo says, "Hold, take my sword. There is husbandry in heaven. The candles are all out. Take thee that too. A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. Give me my sword. Who is there?" Actually, Banquo, there's a kind of a conversation that is going on between Banquo and Fleance. Banquo is over suspicious, because Banquo was the very man, Banquo was the very person who was altogether present with Macbeth from the very beginning, because it was Banquo who was present with Macbeth when the witches were making prophecies. So somehow he could suspect that if Macbeth has to become king, Macbeth has to kill Duncan, right? And this particular day, that means when Duncan is residing at Macbeth's castle, this particular day is the apt situation. It is the it's beneficiary to Macbeth, right, to kill Duncan and become the king. So somehow that is the fundamental thing that Banquo is thinking at this moment. So he cannot sleep, and Macbeth, he is to some extent surveying the place, okay, whether each and everybody is at sleep or not. So, "Give me my sword. Who is there?" Enter Macbeth and the servant with the torch. Macbeth says, "A friend." Banquo says, "What, sir? Not yet at rest. The king is abed. He had been unusual pleasure and sent forth great largesse to your offices. This diamond he greets your wife withal by the name of the most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content." And Macbeth says, "Being unprepared, our will become the servant to defect. Which else should have brought? All is well." Banquo says, "I dreamed last night of 3 weird sisters." So here you can find that Banquo is informing Macbeth of the 3 weird sisters. "To you they have showed some truth." But what is the immediate reaction of Macbeth? Macbeth says, "I think not of them. Yet when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon the business, if you would grant the time." And Banquo, "At your kind leisure." Macbeth says, "If you shall cleave to my consent when it shall make honor for you." And Banquo, "So I lose none in seeking to augment it, but still keep my bosom franchised and allegiance clear. I shall be counselled. Go repose the while. Thanks, sir. The like to you." So here you can find that there is an exit of Banquo and Fleance somehow. So on the stage, we find that Macbeth is completely lonely. You see, he is alone on stage, and the persons have been gone. Why this particular conversation is important? Because it's a kind of an hallucination that Macbeth is facing at this moment. The dagger scene, it indicates the visionary dagger, and it is, as Macbeth is trying to suggest here, that it is coming from his heat oppressed brain. somehow it is a false creation of the mind, you see. So fundamentally, we find that the heat oppressed brain, it actually indicates some kind of a turmoil within the mind of Macbeth. It's a kind of a conflict that is actually happening within the mind of Macbeth. So the conversation between Macbeth and Banquo is necessary before this, right? Because here we find that somehow Macbeth says, "Go beat thy mistress when my drink is ready." Actually, Macbeth is speaking with the servant. He says, "Go beat thy mistress when my drink is ready. She strike upon the bell, get thee to bed," and exit servant. Why the bell has to be rung? Because it will be an indication. It will be an indication that everything is okay. Now Macbeth can move towards the chamber of Duncan and kill him. So then only, with the exit of the servant, Macbeth is completely alone on stage, and Macbeth sees the visionary dagger in front of him. Macbeth says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand. Come, let me clutch thee." And he tries to clutch the handle. The dagger is visionary, it is hanging in front of him, and the handle is towards him, right? And then Macbeth says, "Come, let me clutch thee." And he tries to clutch thee, and then it makes a false, you see. He says, "I have thee not, and yet I see thee still." Then he asks, "Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight?" That means Macbeth can see, but he cannot feel. And that's why he says that, "Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight?" That means I can see them, but I cannot touch them. So it is not sensible, therefore. "Or art thou but a dagger of the mind?" So he could inspect, he could find that somehow these are the daggers of the mind. It's a kind of a false creation, you see, because it is not actually being present in front of him. It's a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain. So it's a kind of a byproduct of a conflict. It's a kind of a byproduct of the mental anxiety, you see. And fundamentally, that is the reason why it comes to the forefront. So here it says, "The proceedings from the heat-oppressed brain. I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this, which now I draw." So it is as distinct as that which I am now drawing. That is this kind of same thing, you see. That I have to use this kind of a dagger for killing Duncan. And I see the same thing is in front of me. "So I see thee yet, in form as palpable as these, which now I draw." And then Macbeth feels that the visionary dagger is gradually moving. He says, "Thou marshals to me the way that I was going." That means it is actually gradually moving towards Duncan's chamber. And he says, "Thou marshals to me," you are leading me, "the way that I was going. And such an instrument I was to use." The similar kind of instrument I have to use. "Mine eyes are made the fool of other senses." Eyes are making fool of other senses. So that's why I can only see, I cannot feel anything else. "And such an instrument I have to use, mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else what all the rest. I see thee still." Now what happened, you know, that there was a kind of a blood drop being found by Macbeth. He says, "I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon guts of blood, which was not so before. There is no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes." And Macbeth could feel that actually it is not happening. Actually it is not present in front of him. So it is the bloody business that actually is within his mind, which informs thus to mine eyes. And then Macbeth says, "Now over the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtain sleep. Witchcraft celebrates spell Hecate's offerings, an widowed martyr alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf whose howls his watch. Thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, towards his design moves like a ghost. So it is night. Macbeth is indicating the particular time, Macbeth is indicating to the moments. It is night, and somehow the nocturnal beasts are beginning their works. They are preparing for the kill. And Macbeth could feel the typical animalistic impulses within him, so that he is also being prepared for killing Duncan. Just like the nocturnal beasts, okay, the beasts of prey, you see, who are preparing for killing their prey. So these are called the animal imageries that have been taken into consideration. Why animal images have been used? Because these are actually indicating to the animalistic impulses present within the character. That's why the imageries have been used. It says, thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they work, for fear the very stones prate of my whereabouts, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whilst I threat he lives, words to the heat of deeds, too cold breath gives, and then the bell rings. So somehow you will find that why this particular scene is important, why this particular reference is important. And the last words, you see that, I go and it is done, the bell invites me, hear it not Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. Actually, this particular knell, death knell, you know, that is being rung at the time of the burial in the churches. It says it summons Duncan to heaven and Macbeth to hell. So that is the fundamental thing. Why this particular scene is important, as I've already suggested, that somehow Macbeth is with the particular view that he had the conflict within. What kind of conflict? That he is the tragic hero, say. And the typical to be or not to be crisis is always present within him. So one particular self of Macbeth is restraining him to do the deed, the horrible deed that is killing Duncan. But another self, the over-ambitious self, it leads Macbeth towards killing Duncan. Somehow that particular conflict, that particular tussle that is going on between Macbeth or within Macbeth, we can find that it gets its outcome in the form of the visionary dagger. These are the typical conflicts that is going within him. It's a kind of an emotional turbulence, you see. It's the tempestuous torments that he's feeling. Okay, so that is the fundamental thing, that is the fundamental reason why Macbeth could feel such kind of anxiety within him, such kind of depression within him, such kind of problem within him, and these gets reflected in the form of the dagger or some kind of thing. It's a kind of a guilt conscience or guilt consciousness that Macbeth was feeling at this moment. And the heat oppressed brain is actually indicating to that particular form. Macbeth is suffering from them, right? Immediately in the next scene, we can find that the next scene, that is scene 2, it is act 2, scene 2. It is considered as the Duncan's murder scene. I'm reading from that. Enter Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth says, that which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. So it is indicating to liquor. What hath quenched them hath given me fire, peace. It was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman which gives the sternest good night. He is about it. The doors are open, and the surfeited grooms, the chamberlains, the gatekeepers, and the surfeited grooms do mock the church it snows, because they are intoxicated. Lady Macbeth had drunk them full, and so they are completely intoxicated and they are completely at asleep. I have drugged their posits, that death and nature do contend about them, whether they live or die. And then the sound is coming from within. It is Macbeth's sound. Macbeth, he's in a horrific state. Macbeth was startled each and every moment. He was just startled with the sound, each and every kind of sound. Macbeth says, "Who is there? What ho?" Lady Macbeth says, "Alack, I am afraid. They have avowed. And it is not done. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. Hark, I laid the daggers ready. He could not miss them." And the famous line, "Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it." I have already suggested about this particular line while discussing on Lady Macbeth's character. So it is the typical kind of a weakness that gets exposed in these lines. Enter Macbeth, "My husband." And Macbeth, "I have done the deed." Macbeth is, in a typical, in a horrific, terrible condition. Macbeth says, "I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise?" Lady Macbeth, "I heard the owls scream and the crickets cry." "Did not you speak?" "When?" "Now, as I descended." "Yes." "Hark, who lies in the next second chamber?" "Donalbain." "Oh, this is a hoary sight." And looking at his hands, Lady Macbeth says, "A foolish thought to say, a sorry sight." Macbeth says, "There is one did love in his sleep, and one cried murder, that they did wake each other. I stood and heard them, but they did say their prayers and address them and again to sleep." So it actually indicates to us Malcolm and Donalbain. Lady Macbeth says, "There are two lords together." Macbeth continues, "One cried, 'God bless us,' and 'Amen,' the other. As they had seen me with these hangman's hands," as if it is indicating that they have seen me. "Listening their fear, I couldn't say Amen." It's very important, you see, that Macbeth could not say Amen when they did say "God bless us." So it's a kind of a typical superstition, you see, that whenever one particular person says these kinds of words, you say "God bless us," or these kinds of greetings, you see, then Amen or such kind of words has to be used, has to be uttered, so to get blessing from God. But Macbeth couldn't do that. Why? Because his heart was so hardened, you see, that Macbeth was suffering from the guilt conscience, as I have already suggested. And Macbeth could feel that the words, these are the holy words that couldn't be pronounced by me because I am the sinner. The sin that Macbeth was feeling within. And it actually, to some extent, it was restraining him into uttering these kinds of holy words and holy sounds. Macbeth says, "I could not say Amen when they did say, 'God bless us.'" Lady Macbeth considered it not so deeply. Macbeth says, "But wherefore could not I pronounce Amen? I had most need of blessing, and Amen stuck in my throat." So that is the typical psychological anguish, you see. It's a typical psychological problem that Macbeth was feeling at this moment. It is actually indicating Macbeth's guilt consciousness, Macbeth's guilt conscience. The conscience is speaking altogether. You see that you are a sinner. You have done the worst kind of a sin ever possible. You have killed a king. In a typical monarchy, killing of a king, that is regicide, is considered to be the worst kind of a sin ever possible. It is a kind of a patricide, and regicide I have already suggested them. Macbeth says, "I had most need of blessing, and Amen stuck in my throat." And Lady Macbeth, "These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad." It's a kind of irony, because Lady Macbeth is saying Lady Macbeth is telling Macbeth that these must not be thought in this way because it will make us mad. What we will find at the end of this text, that who had gone mad? Is it Macbeth, or it is referring to Lady Macbeth? It is obviously Lady Macbeth, right? Lady Macbeth had gone mad. Lady Macbeth was the person who committed suicide. Lady Macbeth had the sleepwalking. Lady Macbeth had the turbulence within her mind. So somehow it's kind of an irony that she is suggesting here. Macbeth says, "Methought I heard a voice cry, 'Sleep no more.' Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. The death of each day's life, sore labor's birth, balm of heart minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast. Very important lines you see. Because you will find here that the sleep is taken as a powerful imagery here. I have already suggested that the reference to sleep is recurrent throughout the play. And somehow here Macbeth says the sleep is very necessary. Why? Because it is the innocent sleep. Sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. That where there is a problem, the creases, you see, the creases of the mind, sleep actually traveled them up, or raveled up, or knits up. It is the death of each day's life. It is the birth of sore labors. It is the balm of heart minds. It is nature's second course. It is the chief nourisher in life's feast. Lady Macbeth, what do you mean? Macbeth continues, still it cried, sleep no more, to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor can sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. So Macbeth had killed his sleep, right? Mind it? I will drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall leave a man forbid. Weary 7 nights, 9 times 9, shall he dwindle, peak and pine. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest tossed. So these were the words the witches actually propounded. They used, and in the same way you see that Macbeth is treating them himself. Glamis hath murdered sleep. Therefore, Cawdor can sleep no more. Macbeth can sleep no more. So Macbeth is indicating to this particular form. So here it says, Lady Macbeth says, who was it that described? Why would they then? You do unbend your noble strength to think so brainsickly of things. Go get some water. Get some water and wash this filthy witness from your hand. Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go carry them. Go carry them and smear the sleepy. Go carry them and smear the sleepy grooms with blood. Macbeth says, I will go no more. So it is another kind of irony, you see, that Lady Macbeth considers that a little water can wash these hands, right? But ultimately, in the sleepwalking scene, we find that Lady Macbeth is continuously, he is trying to wipe her hands, the field, etc., etc. All these things are there. Macbeth says, I will go no more. I am afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not. Lady Macbeth is scolding Macbeth. Lady Macbeth says, infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. It is the eye of childhood that fears a painted devil. If he do bleed, I will gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. An exit, knocking within. So it's a kind of a knock that begins here. This particular knock is actually indicating the knocking that is made by the outsiders. This is Macduff and others, you see. Macduff and Lennox and others. Why? Because it is actually happening at the outer gate of Dunsinane, you see. Because it is already morning. It is already at the dawn, actually. And Duncan had to prepare for his journey. And so therefore, it is a knocking at the entry. Macbeth says, whence is that knocking? How is it with me when every noise appalls me? What hands are here? They pluck out mine eyes. Will all great Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? So it is kind of a hyperbolic statement that Macbeth is stating here, right? Because all the ocean's water cannot wash these hands from me. Because it is the field, the color, the blood is within his psyche, so it cannot be washed. No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seeds incarnadine, making the green one red. So the water, all the water from the seeds cannot wash these hands. Rather, it will turn the water red, right? Re-enter Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth says, my hands are of your color, but ashamed to wear a heart so white. I hear a knocking at the south entry. Retire we to our chamber. A little water clears us of this deed. So there lies the irony. A little water clears us of this deed, right? But in the sleepwalking scene, we find that Lady Macbeth is continually, he is trying to rub his hands and wash his hands and wipe the blood drops from his hand. So at the south entry, we taught him, a little water clears us from of this deed. How easy is it then? Your constancy hath left you unattended. Hark, more knocking is there. More knocking. Get on your nightgown, lest occasion calls us, and show us to be watchers. Be not lost so poorly in your thoughts. And Macbeth, to know my deed, it were best not know myself. Wake Duncan with the knocking. I would thou couldst. So there is the end of Act 2, Scene 2. The next scene, that is Act 2, Scene 3. This particular scene is considered as the porter scene. This is very important. Why? Because you see that it's a kind of a scene that is to be considered as the comic relief scene. Somehow we have to tell it in detail. What is comic relief scene? Though the term comic is altogether being present with this particular form, with this particular term, comic relief, but it is not a part of comedy any longer. Comic relief is a part of tragedy. You see that what happens, it was not present in the classical form of tragedy that you will find in some of the Shakespearean plays like a porter scene in Macbeth and Gravedigger scene in Hamlet, in the Elizabethan and later plays. Comic relief scenes are important because whenever the spectators or audience, they get too much pressurized by the serious scenes, by the tensions that is being gradually molding up, somehow the comic scenes are needed. Why? Because to provide you some kind of relaxation, to give you some kind of breathing space so that you can get the apt time to recover from the trauma that you were in, and somehow you become able to face further complicated and tension oriented scenes. That is the fundamental thing of comic relief. That has to make you prepare for the next graver and more serious and more horrific scenes in a tragedy typically. But somehow Shakespearean comic relief scenes are different. It's Shakespeare. We're dealing with Shakespeare, the genius. So somehow, whereas the comic scenes, say for example, this one, it is the sleepwalking scene, the porter scene in Macbeth and Gravedigger scene in Hamlet. These are the famous two scenes that are considered to be the comic relief scenes. Somehow, in Shakespearean comic relief scenes, these are not to be written only for providing the spectators with much more breathing space. No, these are not happening to be present. Rather, you will find that the comic relief scenes in Shakespeare, they deal with something extra. What are the things? First of all, comic relief scenes, for example, in this one, that is porter scene in Macbeth, you will find that they are carrying some topical associations. What's topical association? You will find that Shakespeare is deliberately choosing some references that are taken from the historical references. Say for example, here we'll find references of a farmer, okay? There will find the references of an equivocator, there is a reference to a tailor, and everything you will find that these are very important so far as the text is concerned, so far as the history is concerned, and somehow Shakespeare is deliberately locating some historical references to his play, right? I'm coming to this in detail, obviously. One particular criticism is always being made against porter scene, that it is an interpolation. What is interpolation? We find that interpolation, this very term, is actually indicating it was not written by Shakespeare, it was written by any other person. What happens, that in the later performances, when a new director comes, okay, to reenact Macbeth or so, or another play, then when for the purpose of making the play more ludicrous, making the play more interesting, the new director adds some scenes or some sections, some lines, some episodes in his performance, or in his performance of the play. This is called interpolation. But the question is certainly that was it an interpolation, Porter's scene? Because everybody said that, or the critics said that somehow the person who could write so serious kind of a play like Macbeth, where is the necessity of using such a ludicrous scenes in this Porter's scene? The question is whether it was an interpolation, or maybe it was a scene deliberately created and added by Shakespeare himself, so far as the play is concerned, so far as the structure of the play is concerned, and the temperament of the play is concerned altogether. So we have to identify the basic implications of this text. Okay, there is a famous essay you will find probably in internet. The name of the, actually it is in the case book. It's a case book essay. The name of the essay was on the knocking at the gate. It was by Caroline Spurgeon. No, it was written by De Quincey. Yes. In that particular essay, De Quincey is making the apt references. He is taking the indications that actually implicate that this is the scene, or this was the scene that were written by Shakespeare himself. Okay, so let us read the scene first, and then we will find the basic implications that the scene actually covers. Actually, it's a porter scene. You see the drunken porter. He's standing at the main entry at Duncan, and there was the knocking. He's completely drunk. This man is completely drunk, and somehow the porter considers himself to be standing at the hell gate, the gate of hell. Okay, and there are numerous knocking from outside, and the persons want to enter hell, right? So these are somehow why hell and heaven, this particular reference is being implicated. This is some serious connotation may implicate that somehow Macbeth's castle is considered to be a hell where a king is to be murdered, and the outside world is indicated in terms of, say, earth or something. So the porter says, here is, first let us read. The porter says, here is a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old turning the key. Knock, knock, knock. Who is there in the name of Beelzebub? Oh, here is a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. So first he identifies a farmer who hanged himself, who killed himself on the expectation of plenty. Come in time. Have napkins enough about you. Here you will sweat for it, because it's hell, you see, that here you will find apt temperatures and over temperature is there. It's too hot. And that's why you will find some napkins. You will find you have the need of some handkerchiefs with you. And knocking within. Knock, knock, knock. Who is there? In the other devil's name. Faith, here is an equivocator. Equivocator, you see, the persons who equivocates. That means says something and means something other. Faith, here is an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against the other scale. So that means he could choose any interpretation of any word that he has been spoken by him. Who committed treason enough for God's sake. So in the name of God, he has committed treason enough. Yet could not equivocate to heaven. But at the end, he has to enter hell. Why? Because of the equivocacy, you see. That I am, say for example, I am a clergyman and I am stating in the name of God multiple things. But ultimately these are all lies. These are all wrong informations, you see. And at the end, what happens at the doomsday, when the day of judgment comes, I cannot equivocate myself to heaven. Rather, I have to enter hell. So that is actually implicated in this particular form. Knock, knock, knock. Who is there? Faith, oh, here is an English tailor. Come hither for stealing out of a French hose. Come in tailor, here you may roast your goose. That means it's actually referring to iron. That means roasting goose means iron. It's making warm or making hot. So, knock, knock, never quiet. What are you? Oh, but this place. And now actually he is opening the gate and the gush of winds is coming. The cold air is being thrust on him. So, but this place is too cold for hell. I will devil porter is no further. I had thought to have let in some of all professions. that go to the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire, knocking within, and I'll pray you, remember the porter, and opens the gate. So that is the scene, that is the small scene. It's in prose, it's not in blank verse that Shakespeare wrote. So in this whole text of Macbeth, you will find that the letter that was written by Macbeth to Lady Macbeth, and this porter scene, this particular wordings of porter, these were written in prose. It was not written in blank verse or verse in general. So what is important here, as I've suggested, that somehow we have to identify that what are the basic implications the text is considering, and whether it was written by Shakespeare himself or not. Okay, so there are three references. One, first of all, it is the farmer. The second, the equivocator. The third one, the English tailor. First, let us think that how so far these characters are being associated with the character of Macbeth. What does the farmer do? The farmer hangs himself on the expectation of plenty. Do you not find that Macbeth is killing himself to some extent? Macbeth is preparing for the expectation of plenty. What is the expectation? Macbeth is expecting, security. Macbeth is expecting something else. Macbeth is becoming the king. He's expecting to become a king, right? And this expectation actually leads him to destruction. So, therefore, the farmer, who is actually for the expectation of plenty, is rowing his seeds more, and gradually, when the cultivation or when the outcome is maximum, the price drops, and there is a kind of a failure, and there's a huge loss, and that's why he is committing suicide. So actually, this particular character is referring to Macbeth, number one. Number two, there is an equivocator. And you will find that the equivocation, the theme of equivocation, is altogether very important in Macbeth. Why? Because equivocator or equivocation is being associated with the witches. The witches tell something, but that means something different. Towards the end of the play, you will find that there is a kind of a particular scene where Macbeth meets witches again. Okay, there was also Hecate. And there was the apparitions, you see. Okay, and each and every apparitions are indicating towards something, some detail, but that Macbeth could not identify. Macbeth couldn't understand what they say, but ultimately they will mean something different. Okay, so equivocation is another very much important theme in this particular text. So the reference to an equivocator is altogether important considering the play, obviously. The third one is an English tailor who is stealing up from the French hose. French hose is a up to knee, the stockings, you see. This is called the hose. Okay, and it's very tight. And when an English tailor is cutting some particular portion from that hose, it actually indicates that Macbeth is cutting some or stealing some sections from his life. Okay, so from these angles, we can see that the farmer, equivocator, and the English tailor, everything is actually referring to Macbeth is the stealer, right? He is stealing something. He is stealing the throne from Malcolm and Dunalbain. He is not in general form, you see that in a general way, Macbeth cannot become the king, but he has to steal. He is the usurper to some extent, right? So we can find that the farmer, equivocator, and the English tailor, they are directly or indirectly relating to Macbeth. Now, what I'm suggesting here, that these particular three references are having some topical association or topical allusions. What is topical allusion? The term topical is actually referring to some historical reference. It is the chronicler things. I'm reading from that particular section. It says, what it says, okay, I'm reading from one particular book. It is the Verity edition of Macbeth. Okay, A.W. Verity. Here, regarding the farmer, it says in the note section, this is commonly thought to allude to exceptionally abundant harvest in 1606 and the consequent lowness of the price of corn, which drove the farmer to desperation. Okay, the price of corn was then, it is from a particular entry, that is, it's Maloney's entry. Here it writes, the price of the corn was then a great criterion of plenty or scarcity. There is the summer of autumn of 1606. There was a prospect, that is expectation of plenty, of corn appears from the audit book of the College of Eton. For the price of wheat in that year was lower than it was for 13 years afterwards. You see that Shakespeare is not referring to something imaginary. That during Shakespeare's time, that particular, the price drops up with the plenty of harvesting and so it was a particular thing. It was an incident, and somehow the spectators who were watching them, they could relate what these words are actually referring to. So these were carefully culled by Shakespeare himself. It was not an interpolation. It was not something that were completely added by any other person. So that is important here, number one. The second thing that is important is the reference to the equivocator. Okay, so far as the equivocator is considered, it is referring to page number 256. Just wait. Okay, in the particular section, it is being said that it is generally recognized as a direct reference to the doctrine of equivocation avowed by Henry Garnet, superior of the order of Jesuits in England, on his trial for the gunpowder treason on the 28th of March 1606, and to his perjury on that occasion, or as Shakespeare expresses, to his swearing with both the scales against either scale. The trial at which King James himself was present incognito doubtless attracted very general notice, and the reference here must have been perceived at once by Shakespeare's audience. Maloney shows that equivocation was a striking feature of the defense. Thus, a contemporary later describes how Garnet fell into a large discourse defending equivocation. The official record of the case proves that one of the judges desired him not to equivocate, and that Garnet, being convicted of inconsistency in his evidence, cried the Lord's mercy and said he had offended if equivocation did not help. So you can identify that this is actually referring to the Henry Garnet episode, where Garnet was the equivocator who was associated with the gunpowder treason, where maximum portions of the gunpowder was stocked at the cellar of the Windsor Castle. Under the castle where the king was there, James, and it is actually indicating that the blast would happen and somewhere the king along with the courtiers will die certainly. Somehow it comes to the forefront and gunpowder plot was completely being negated. That means it was a failure. Somehow this particular episode was also altogether known to the persons in general. This particular doctrine of equivocation is referring to, according to this doctrine, the immorality of a lie did not consist in the deception practiced by some person who was deceived, but in the difference between the words uttered and the intended meaning of the speaker. If therefore the speaker could put any sense, however extravagant, upon the words of which he made use, he might lawfully deceive the hearer without taking any account of the fact that he would be certain to attach some other and more probable meaning to the words. So it is the reference to the Porter scene, and the equivocation actually indicates this particular thing. So that is why what I'm suggesting here, that Shakespeare is deliberately choosing these terminologies because it actually shares some topical association. So far as the third one, that is the English Tailor, is considered, a double hit full amount at the tailor who skims his cloth, you see, yet charges his customer for the full amount. That means he cuts or steals some cloth from that and charges his customer the full amount. And the English practice of aping foreign fashions. The latter is a stock subject of Elizabethan satire and is one point of the sarcasm here, because the French shows, you see, the English personalities, they are using the French fashion to follow because it was their processes. So somehow it is also referring to the fashion habits of the Englishes, and somehow this particular, or these all together, the farmer, the reference to the farmer, the equivocator, the reference to a tailor, all these things are important considering Macbeth in detail. Another thing is important that actually proves that this is not an interpolation, rather this is some particular scene that was written by Shakespeare himself. So far as the stage time is concerned, just think about the scene. After the commitment of the scene, you will find that Macbeth and Lennox enters, and Macbeth and Lennox, they are facing Macbeth, right? So at the last scene, we find that Macbeth, in his blood-stained gown and blood-stained face and hands. And immediately in the next scene, you will find that Macbeth is entering, Macbeth and Lennox, and they are facing Macbeth with the new dress and completely washed up. So how can it be possible that without this particular scene, Macbeth could find stage, so far as the stage and the theatricality is concerned, Macbeth could find the time to change. So that's why some particular episode has to be added here, so that Macbeth, the character Macbeth, or maybe the actor Macbeth, he could get the ample time to change his clothes and wash his face and hands. Okay, so these are very much important in considering the implications of the text Macbeth and how these are associated with Shakespeare, how these are implicating the basic resurgences of the text itself, how these are important so far as the plot of the play is concerned, how these are important, how the theatricality is concerned, you see. So these are the three scenes. Number one, as I've discussed, number one, it was the dagger scene. Second, Duncan's murder scene, and the third one is the porter scene. These are very important so far as the structure of the play is concerned, so far as the plot and the action of the play is concerned. So you have to take these scenes in as important, and you have to go with them in detail. So today up to this, more when we meet. Thank you.